All right, we made it to the midpoint of the tribulation. Last video we left off, we had 6 of the 7 trumpets judgments that had fallen. And as I mentioned in an earlier video, um, the 7th of the sealed judgment was really the unleashing of the trumpet judgments. And now we're going to see that the 7th of the trumpet judgments is really the unleashing of the final, what are called the bowl judgments. And so the midpoint of the tribulation, um, if you believe that prophecy is written sequentially, which I believe, we are at the midpoint of the tribulation, right at the end of the 6th trumpet. And I noticed when I was reviewing the slide that I left off one of the most important set of passages. I didn't have this reference on here before. So I added Revelation 10 through 14, which is really the midpoint of the tribulation. And before we start taking a look at these passages, just a couple of observations. One is, since there's so much going on here at the midpoint of the tribulation, so much being described in Revelation 10 through 14, we're not going to be able to walk through the passages and read the um, all the different verses and then describe them. We're just going to go through these passages and point out some of the highlights so that in future study you can line things up for yourself and say, well, we must be at the midpoint of the tribulation if these events are occurring. There's also some more reference down below here to some passages you can take a look at. Again, they're lining up with the midpoint of the tribulation period. So, okay, let's take a look at Revelation 10 through 14. We're right here at Revelation 10, and the first thing we'll point out in this Revelation 10 set of passages is we've got an angel appearing, and it says, I saw another mighty angel. And what's in reference to? Well, you have to back up, but in Revelation 9, we finished the 6 trumpet judgments, and the trumpets were blown by angels. And now we see here a reference to another mighty angel. Now, this description, robed in a cloud and a rainbow above his head and all, a lot of people say, well, maybe that's actually a picture of Christ in heaven. And as you see down below, the activity of what this angel is doing sure seems like something that maybe Christ will do, because what this angel is going to proclaim basically is that the earth is now being claimed, the title deed is being claimed on behalf of God, and taking back of the earth. But if you go back and you can match up this description in Revelation 1, starting in verse 12 through 20, it seems like it's the picture of Christ in heaven. But the one little giveaway that says, no, it's probably not, is in Greek, this word for another. Greek is very specific, as I understand it, and the word another is actually in reference to another one of the same kind. And again, you'd have to say, well, what kind are we talking about? And in context, you would need to go back, take a look again, Revelation 9, and understand that the other kind of angels were the angels blowing the trumpets. And so it very likely is not a picture of Christ in heaven. It very likely is a picture of a mighty angel of the same kind that were blowing the trumpets. Okay, so that hopefully clears up a little bit of some of the debates that occur over this first couple of verses in chapter 10. And this angel comes down to earth in the imagery, puts one foot on the shore, one foot in the sea, declares there's no more delay, is going to declare that the earth is being taken back. He gives the scroll and tells John to eat it, and it's sweet in his mouth but bitter in his stomach. And really, that's kind of the message of the Bible, which is seeing the righteousness of God and having your faith in Him. You see how righteous He is and how good He is for the salvation of people that believe in Him. But the bitter part is we're about to see here the most tremendous set of judgments about to be poured out on earth and on the people that don't believe. And so there's a bittersweet thing that's being announced here. The next part is really interesting because, again, we're at the midpoint of the tribulation and we have two witnesses, and they will trample. Let's pick it up right here. They'll be in the holy city for 42 months, and they have the two witnesses here that prophesied for 1260 days. And so there's multiple references here, and 42 months is 3.5 years, and 1260 days is 3.5 years. And so they're trying to be very specific here to say how much time is left of all these judgments. And these references here to lampstands and trees actually take us back into the Old Testament. We don't have time to dig through some of those, but just again, it adds color if you realize actually most of Revelation, there's hundreds of references or allusions to the Old Testament. And so without the background of studying the whole Old Testament and understanding a lot of the passages that were in there, you don't see how elegant some of these tie-ins are. But we'll leave that for now and just say these two witnesses have a 3.5-year mission starting at this point in the tribulation. They're going to be prophesying and trying to bring people to repentance. Now, of course, the Antichrist isn't going to like this, and there'll constantly be people trying to attack and kill him. And these two witnesses have the power to basically strike however they want just by the word that's coming out of their mouth. And so there's a couple of different things here that are interesting. One is they can send plagues. They can dry up waters or cause drought. Here, no rain during the time they are prophesying. And people say, wow, these two witnesses are doing the deeds of Moses, and they're doing they're calling down fire, kind of like Elijah did. So there's a lot of speculation. Who are these two witnesses? And we know one's going to be Elijah because there was a promise in the Old Testament that Elijah would appear. I think it's in Malachi. The Elijah would appear before the coming of the Messiah. And so we're pretty sure that Elijah is one of these witnesses. The debate's about the second one, but I think it's very likely it's going to be Moses. And then when they had finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will attack them and overpower them, and the dead bodies will lie in the public square in the city figuratively called Sodom and Egypt, where the Lord was crucified. So they're in Jerusalem, where the Lord was crucified. That's where they are. And they'll lay dead for 3.5 days. And nobody's going to bury them. And the inhabitants of earth will gloat over them, celebrating, sending gifts, because the two prophets that tormented those who live on earth. I think it's a little interesting here that if you watch any of the news from the Middle East, they have a penchant for if they have a successful attack on the Jews in Israel, they give gifts to each other when there's been death caused. And so, again, is there a tie-in here or not? I don't know. After 3.5 days, they will be resurrected in the sight of everybody. And what's fun about that is, again, we can see the supernatural nature of what's going on. And these two witnesses basically will triumph in a resurrection over the people that killed them. And here we go. We have that very hour, a severe earthquake, and 1/10 of the city collapsed, and 7,000 people were killed in the quake. And the survivors were terrified and gave glory to God. And so some people are still coming to God, even here at the midpoint, and they recognize that these judgments are to wake them up. All right, so here we are now. We're in, and we're going to hear the seventh trumpet blown. And the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord. So here's the proclamation that the earth is being taken back. And the 24 elders who were seated on the throne fell and worshiped and gave thanks. And so you can see we're involved as the church in heaven. we're involved in the declarations and we're involved in seeing these events occur. So we're not just flying around on plucking harps on clouds. We're actually involved in witnessing everything that's going on. As we mentioned in prior videos, there's signs given, and a lot of times before the next big judgment comes, we get the same repeated set of signs, which is lightning and peals of thunder and earthquakes and a severe hailstorm. So it's a prelude again to something really bad about to happen. Now we're going to learn the next set of very insightful things that come out of these interlude chapters. And if I didn't mention it before, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14, not only are they at the midpoint of the tribulation, but they're characterized by their sort of interlude chapters. 10 sort of rounds out the sixth trumpet and sets the stage for the proclaiming that God is going to come and reclaim the earth. 11, 12, and 13 are filling in all sorts of detail about where we're at the midpoint of the tribulation. And we start to get a little view, especially as we go from 13 into 14, of the things that are about to occur on earth, and a little bit of a foreshadowing of what to expect. And so they're really important chapters because they pour in a lot of detail about what's going on at this period. And then we'll see it, we pick up again in 15 and we finish off with the last set of judgments. So right here we're at the woman and the dragon are going to appear, and there's a great sign in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars over her head. Okay, and we get some more description. She was pregnant and cried out in pain. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon, 7 heads and 10 horns, and crowns on its 7 heads here. Tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to earth. And the dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so it might devour her the moment she was born. Let's just kind of make some general observations here. One is Revelation in particular, but a lot of the prophetic passages use prophetic symbolism, and this gets people all confused, but in many cases the definition of what these symbols are defined right in the text. A lot of times it's defined right within the same chapters. So I'll just cut to the chase on some of this. When women are pictured symbolically, they're representing a belief system, good or bad. And in this case, if you go back to Genesis 37 in verse 9, you'll see this exact same imagery of a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and 12 stars on her head. And it was a dream that was given to Joseph, and he was picturing basically the nation of Israel, and then you can see here the nation of Israel births Jesus the Messiah. And so that's the interpretation of this passage. And then you've got the Satan and the devil showing up here that wants to kill the Messiah, and we know that's true because of what happened at the cross, and also what's about to happen again at the Battle of Armageddon. And her child was snatched up to God in his throne, which again was the resurrection of Christ. And then the woman pictured here is going to flee into the wilderness to a place prepared to her by God where she may be taken care of, again, for 1,260 days. And so we see over and over and over again this 1,260 day or 42-month reference, which is the remaining 3.5 years of the tribulation. So again, we're smack dab in the middle of the tribulation period. Okay, so this woman that represents the Jewish believers fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God where she might be taken care of for the 1260 days, which is 3.5 years. Let's go take a look at some possibly related passages to this. And I think it's important because it's easy to confuse. Does the church stay on earth through the tribulation, as some believe, and are sheltered? Or does the church go to heaven as we've represented? And then there's some passages that talk about sheltering of people east of Jerusalem, and I think this is where we get a tie into this reference here. Is I think there's a remnant of Jewish believers that are going to be sheltered and taken care of for 1260 days somewhere in the mountains outside of Jerusalem. So let's start in Zechariah 14 here, a very famous passage. Again, the context here is Day of the Lord, so we're in the tribulation period for this passage. Behold, the day is coming for the Lord when the spoil will be taken from you, will be gathered and divided in your midst, for I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses plundered, and the women raped. Half of the city shall go out into exile, and that sort of sounds like a tie-in to what we just read in Revelation. But the rest of the people shall not go out and be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as when he fights in the day of battle. So we see the Lord here is then going to go accomplish his goal. And on that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east, and on the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west, and a very wide valley will be created here, so that one half of the mountain shall move northward and the other half southward, and you shall flee to the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountain shall reach Azel. And you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, the king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and the Holy Ones with him. So in this passage we just recap is we're in the day of the Lord, and the Jewish people will be able to flee outside of the city of Jerusalem. The remnant will, and they'll be protected in the mountains outside of Jerusalem, and the city itself will be judged. Well, let's take a look at Micah 2 and just see it's possibly a related passage. I will surely assemble all of you, O Jacob. I will gather the remnant of Israel. I will set them together like a sheepfold, like a flock in its pasture, a noisy multitude of men. Who opens the breach and goes up before them? They break through and pass the gate and go out by it. Their king passes on before them, the Lord at their head. And so another little picture here potentially of the Lord leading the remnant of the Jews. Then in Isaiah 63, again, we've got the Lord in the day of vengeance, so we know we're in the tribulation again for this reference. Who is this that comes from Edom in crimson garments from Basra? He who's splendid in apparel and marching in the greatness of his strength. It is I, speaking in righteousness, mighty to save. Why is your apparel red and your garments like his who treads in the winepress? I've trod in the winepress alone, and from the peoples no one was with me. I trod my anger and trampled them in my wrath. Their lifeblood splattered on my garments and stained all of my apparel. For the day of vengeance was in my heart, and my year of redemption has come. I looked, but no one was to help, and was appalled, but there was no one to uphold. So my own arm brought me salvation, and my wrath upheld me. I trampled down the peoples in my anger. I made them drunk in my wrath, and I poured out their lifeblood on earth. So again, we've got some references that seem to tie in. Basra are mountains that are east of Jerusalem, and so there could be a tie-in with the Revelation passage we're looking at. We definitely have a tie-in here in terms of this is a messianic kind of a passage with Jesus basically saying he's going to pour out his wrath, and then we get this grapes wine press thing that you can picture blood symbolically being poured out, and we know that again the symbol is sort of decoded right here in the passage. The lifeblood splattered on his garments, and so um, that's a good tie. We also see down here below that Jesus is doing this by himself, and he's the one at the day of Armageddon that accomplishes the final slaughter. And so Zechariah here sort of ties in with this tribulation set of passages we're in, and it foreshadows the remaining 3.5 years that we're about to take a look at. Okay, we're back in Revelation. We're just going to finish up this last little bit here in 12 just so we can get the final picture, and then we're going to do a part 2 to this video. Let's leave off, I think we left off here in verse 13. And then we saw that a dragon, he had been hurled to earth, and he pursued the woman, which is the Jewish people. And the Jewish people were given wings like a great eagle so they might fly to a place prepared for her in the wilderness where she may be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time. And if we look in terms of how this nomenclature is used earlier in the Bible, it turns out to be a year, 2 more years, and half a year. So 3.5 years again. We're seeing this over and over and over. So we see that the Jewish people, at least the remnant, are going to be taken to some place near Jerusalem, and they're going to be sheltered and protected for 3.5 years of this final horrific judgment. And then we see that the serpent, Satan, spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and try and sweep her away as a torrent. But the earth opened up and helped the woman, swallowing the great river and the dragon that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. So again, it's imagery, but you can see that Antichrist, supercharged by Satan, is going to be chasing after the Jews as they flee from the city to the mountains, and God's going to prevent it. And the last little part here to look at is we see when Satan through the Antichrist is unable to get after these last Jewish believers, then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring. So that's the other Jewish believers, that the other Jewish people that didn't make it in this escape, those who keep God's commands and hold fast to their testimony in Jesus. And so he's going off to try and basically slaughter any remaining people. Let's wrap up this as a part 1 to the mid-tribulation discussion. One last thing I'll just point out is we've got all this imagery that we went through. The woman, and especially this picture at the beginning of 12, as a sign that appeared in heaven. And if you haven't been with us on this video series journey, I just want to take a quick time out and recognize again that back in Genesis 1, God said he put the stars in heaven and the moon and the sun for signs and for seasons. And so one of the things we'll take a look at probably in a future video series is there a tie-in on this description, not only to the Old Testament and Joseph as we picture his description of Israel and what was going to happen, but is there also a tie-in with the constellations and a sign that God is trying to give us that we're in the tribulation period? So I'll just leave that as a teaser for a future video series, and let's close off part 1 right now.